Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Dialogue. I'm Taimur Shamil. The fighting in Afghanistan continues, and this week, the previous week, there was heavy fighting in Helmand, and the Helmand province has seen unprecedented, I would say, clashes between the Taliban and the Afghan security forces. Though this is not new, Helmand has been at the heart of clashes between the Taliban and the government forces. From the start, I would say from 2005 to 2006, and till now, we have seen that the situation in Helmand has been pretty fluid, I would say. And the dynamics of Helmand are unique. Helmand itself is a case study. We see chiefdoms in Helmand, rampant corruption, warlordism for that matter, intra-tribal wars we have seen over there. And then there are other elements like Taliban and the Afghan security forces over there. Helmand and Kandahar both are similar in very cases, lot of cases. Talking about Helmand specifically, this last week there were about, officials say that there were about 30,000 people who were displaced from different areas in Helmand. And while these clashes were going on, the government forces, Afghan government forces, they called in the US Air Force, and the air raids were carried out against the Taliban. And still in several parts of Helmand, the fighting continues and the situation is precarious. Even in several parts of North Afghanistan, the situation is not that smooth, not that secure. But primarily this is the idea of today's discussion, that while the Taliban and the government representatives are discussing peace in Doha, the fighting continues. What exactly do the Taliban want when they carry out attacks against the government forces? As I talked about Helmand, probably it's about, many experts think that it's about that Taliban think that the peace talks can continue and they can gain more ground, more areas under their control, and because this is about real politics, this is about the situation on the ground, and whoever controls the ground situation would control the situation, the environment for the peace talks. We're going to discuss about Afghanistan, the security situation over there, and the future of intra-Afghan peace talks with our special guest today in the studios. We are joined by Mr. Rauf Hassan, renowned senior analyst and the director of a Regional Peace Institute, a think tank based in Islamabad. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, very kind.
Our second guest is Ms. Amna Khan. She is the director of Afghanistan and Middle East Center at Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad, based in Islamabad. Thank you for joining us, Amna. Mr. Hassan, starting with these clashes this week in Helmand specifically, how do you see this? The peace talks continue in Doha, and we see the fighting as well in Helmand, heavy fighting, by the way, 30,000 people displaced and they're moving to other places. How do you see the situation over there?
Well, I look at Helmand as a microcosm of the overall situation in Afghanistan. True, peace negotiations are undergoing in Doha, but at the same time, there is nothing. I took out these two agreements today, one signed by the US and the Taliban and the other signed by US and the government of Afghanistan. There's nothing relating to lessening violence contained in any of these agreements, basically. So this is something that came up much later. The situation is that how is it that Taliban have come where they stand today in about 19 years? When the Americans first came to Afghanistan, they had come with an intention of rooting them out. They had not come then to be sitting across the table negotiating peace with them. They have come here simply because they continued to fight. This is their strength. And as you use the term realpolitik, no side would like to forfeit or forsake its strength. The strength of the Taliban is through violence. They will definitely continue to fight, and it will get more ferocious because unfortunately the Afghan government has been dragging its feet on the path to peace. More particularly when I talk about the Afghan government, it is President Ghani. He is somehow, it's gotten into his mind that he is president-elect for 5 years and that he should stay on for 5 years, which theoretically speaking is not acceptable even for people who have been working with him in the last 5-6 years when he has been the president. So this has been a major constituent, which has postponed, number one, the initiation of the dialogue in Doha, and is now impacting the pace of its movement towards ceasefire, ultimate ceasefire. The question whether there's going to be any change in the Taliban attitude with regard to creating this violence or with regard to combating violence created by the other side, because they are not the sole party to blame. I feel no, they will not. They are committed in these agreements not to attack the Americans and their allies. And there has not been a single instance of that in the last 7 months since the agreement was signed, when the Taliban have been accused of attacking the Americans or their allies. It is the government of Afghanistan and their forces which they continue to attack, and which they will continue to attack. So far as I am concerned, and my understanding of Afghanistan goes, they will continue stamping further their authority on as much territory in Afghanistan as possible before signing the peace deal, if and when it comes. It's still a long way off. Till the elections in America, I don't see any significant progress in the peace deal. But after the elections have been held on the 7th of November, well, I think maybe if Biden is elected, they will, the government of Kabul would look for some kind of reprieve from him, because they expect that his approach to Afghanistan is going to be qualitatively different from that of Trump, which I don't agree with. But they would be looking for some kind of reprieve, and if that does not come, which will take us to January, because he doesn't take over before 20th of January next year. So this is going to be a slow-moving period, and well, the fight will go on.
And
definitely.
Definitely. And there's so many things, Amna, that we can discuss about. But before that, Zalmay Khalilzad, the American envoy, has said that Taliban have agreed to reset, the agreement and the understanding on it, and reduce the attacks and violence in Afghanistan. What do you think about this? And would they reduce the attacks? Because when it comes to Helmand, Kandahar, these two specific provinces, this situation has been very tricky, even for the American and allied forces. Massive corruption, and by that I mean that even if they have been supporting the chiefdoms who have been fighting against the Taliban, you would find American Humvees, somehow in the Taliban control. So how do you see the situation over there?
Well, let me just follow up from what Mr. Hassan said regarding the agreement. It's interesting because in the agreement there was no mention of, halting hostilities against the Afghan state or Afghan forces. The mention was that the Taliban would not attack American forces, and this is what the Taliban have strayed to their commitment, and they haven't been attacking American forces, and I think this is where the problem lies. And this is an issue that was overlooked in this agreement that was signed, and I will never call it a peace agreement, because of course it wasn't a peace agreement, it was a compromise at best. So here I think, now that Zalmay Khalilzad has said that the Taliban will, at least reduce or move towards the cessation of hostilities towards the Afghan state, it is the Americans' responsibility, because they are a major party and a stakeholder, and they should ensure this. And I think the onus is also on the Taliban, and I've said this time and again, that the Taliban can no longer justify their violence against, Afghan national security forces. Because if you remember in the beginning, they would always say their violence is based on the liberation of Afghanistan. But now they're killing innocent Afghans. And I think the Taliban should not see this as a sign of weakness or surrender, but rather to present themselves, as a more responsible stakeholder that can assume for itself a political position in the future of Afghanistan. So this is very important. And I think, again, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We'll have to see whether the Taliban stay true to their commitment regarding the violence.
When Ghani said he wasn't happy with Zalmay Khalilzad, and there are reports when he probably didn't even meet Zalmay Khalilzad when he was there in Kabul. Do you think that at that point, back then, President Ghani was justified?
Look,
I mean, his approach towards the whole peace process?
I have been very critical of the peace process, the agreement. Again, the word peace keeps on coming up time and again. Because, how could you not include Kabul, which is a major stakeholder? And if you see, the reason why this agreement hasn't been very successful has been that there was no mention of a ceasefire. There has been no talk of, the withdrawal, and also what the future political setup of Afghanistan will be. And I think if these issues had been addressed or not overlooked, I think they would have been, the Taliban wouldn't have been in such a position of strength. So I think now that the intra-Afghan talks are taking place, no matter how shaky they are, I think the Americans have a responsibility to make sure that both sides, particularly the Taliban, honor their agreement. This is very important, and their side of the agreement.
Right.
And I think this violence is not just limited to Helmand. I understand the
course.
Taliban, they're expanding and they want to have more position when it comes to the negotiating table. But again, I put a lot of the onus on the Americans.
Well, this is very interesting. There is American responsibility. Mr. Hasan, when even Pakistan says that there shouldn't be any hasty decision or hasty troops withdrawal from Afghanistan, are we talking about the same situation? Because we're also concerned about the security situation in Afghanistan, resurgence of TTP, Jamaat-ul-Ahrar and Hezbollah for that matter. So even the regional countries probably would want US forces to take some responsibility, but would they? That is the question now.
Well, I think we need to debate this a little. Amina has brought up a couple of issues, which are relevant to the current discussion. We must debate this because this entire agreement revolves around 4 points. The ultimate point, fourth point, is the ceasefire.
Right, yes.
The first 2 points relate to the Taliban and the Americans, with the cessation of hostilities in Kabul against the Americans and an assurance that that the Afghan soil will not be used against the Americans and their allies by the Taliban. So they have done that. Number two, the agreement on the part of the Americans to withdraw troops. It's a 14-month agreement.
Yes.
It stretches to 14 months to reduce the numbers to 8,600 in the first 135 days, and then to completely withdraw from Afghanistan in the next 9.5 months. So basically within 14 months, they will not be present in Afghanistan any longer. That leads to the initiation of the intra-Afghan dialogue. And I suppose this is where the problem arose. Ghani dragged his feet. He dragged his feet on the release of prisoners for a full 7 months. These talks were supposed to commence in March of this year. Yes. They actually commenced this month, right? So March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, 7 months. He dragged his feet for 7 months. He delayed the release of prisoners. So if there has been a violation, while I am no supporter and no sympathizer of Taliban, but you have to go by the agreements that they signed. If there has been a violation of the agreement in spirit, maybe not in substance, it has been from the government of Kabul, not from the Taliban. They have stuck to the deal because they are the gainers in this. They are the winners in this. The Americans offered it on a platter to the Taliban. And their statements since then have been sort of augmenting the Taliban position in Afghanistan, not reducing the Taliban position in Afghanistan. The President Trump's statement just a few days ago that, I expect my people to come back to America before Christmas.
Very important.
I mean, that strengthened the Taliban, and maybe this Helmand thing that we're talking about is a direct consequence of that. They said, all right, they're going maybe earlier than even stipulated in the agreement. So, let's get some more territory. So this basically psychology. Ceasefire is contained at clause number 4. This is once the intra-Afghan dialogue has ended successfully and there is a principal, basic, fundamental agreement on how to move forward. Like, for example, is there going to be an interim government? If there is an interim government, well, okay, constitute that interim government and there would be a ceasefire. So this has gone strictly according to the timetable laid out in the agreement between the US and Taliban and US and the Afghan government.
This is very interesting. This is very interesting. Even in the
very,
Jirga.
So, but I agree with Amina to the extent that this was an oversight. This should have been debated and discussed at the time of signing the agreement. But now that it has been overlooked, there is no way Taliban would agree to amend it. Because they are the gainers. As I said, they gain with every day that passes.
A lot of delay, Amna.
Yeah.
So from the government side, President Ghani delayed it for 7 months. And even in the lower Jirga, Grand Jirga, it was probably Dr. Abdullah who wanted to expedite the process.
Yes.
And a lot of experts and observers were noticing that President Ghani wasn't still very comfortable with the idea of releasing the Taliban prisoners. So the onus, let's say, is on the Afghan government or the way they are handling it. How do you see this?
Well, look, let's not forget, while external elements are there that oppose the peace process and create hurdles, I think one of the major hurdles is the internal divisions within Afghanistan that continue to pose a major threat. And we've seen this not only in the form of the Ghani-Abdullah rivalry, but also, as Rauf Saab mentioned, the hurdles that have been created by President Ghani in the release of prisoners. And even if you see now, once the High Council for National Reconciliation was made, there were issues regarding the names as well. But yes, Abdullah
the
is
members.
right, but he's trying to take the lead and push for this. But I think, again, I say this often, and I think this is overlooked, that one of the major hurdles that I just mentioned is that national reintegration and social and national healing are so important within Afghanistan to move forward. And the fact that you saw, even though these two parties have been engaging on and off, but it just shows you the history of mistrust that exists between both sides. I'm talking about the Taliban and the representatives of the government in Kabul. And therefore, I think that, let us take this process. It's an icebreaker at best. And the process is very fragile. And it's extremely complex. So we shouldn't, expect, developments or positive results to happen overnight. It's a war that's been taking place for more than 19 years and it will continue. Therefore, I think cautiously we have to be optimistic. And the whole point is these two parties just need to continue to engage. As long as there is engagement and dialogue, I think then, this is a positive development.
And even when these talks started, a lot of people were thinking that probably US is trying to impose peace talks on Afghanistan and they want to expedite it because it's ultimately President Trump who wants to pull out the troops because of his domestic reasons. So the Afghans cannot expedite it, as you are saying. This thing would take its course and its time. Is that the point? That
here I just want to say, we're talking about the withdrawal of foreign forces, but do remember what Abbas Tanak-Say said regarding, while their principal demand has always been the withdrawal of foreign forces, but at the same time, remember in Moscow twice, Abbas Tanak-Say has categorically stated that they would be open to some sort of US presence in Afghanistan if it revolved around development or assistance or reconstruction. So, there's a big question mark. I think it's still too soon to tell. Will all the troops withdraw? And is it a wise decision for all the troops to withdraw from Afghanistan? Because it's very convenient. Trump wants them back, but then what happens? And I think, everybody knows what happened with the withdrawal of the Soviets and whatnot. So I think, unless and until some sort of stability is not achieved, even if it's limited stability, I think the Americans should not withdraw in a hasty manner.
Mr. Hassan, what do you think about the US presence, or let's say some kind of international presence over there, so that some organization, probably some countries there to keep a check on what is happening?
Well, this is a very interesting subject, and I think in one of my articles I wrote about 6 months ago, I covered this, and I'm one of those people who predicted a strategic understanding between the US and Taliban, because the US may like to withdraw the troops like it usually does from other parts of the world. It has done that in the past also, but it does not mean that it is going to withdraw its interest in this part of the world. They are going to remain interested in Afghanistan. So I predicted about 7-8 months. I wrote about it. It's not a prediction. I think it was a projection, a rational projection, that I look forward to a level of strategic understanding between the Taliban and the Americans. And this is what Amina is talking about, Stanek-Say's statement in Russia. Yes, they would possibly welcome, and I think the statement that the government of Pakistan released, requesting the foreign forces not to withdraw in a rush, I think is also in conformity with the wishes being expressed by the Taliban also. I've always spoken about an implementation mechanism. So whatever understanding is arrived between, let's say, the Taliban and the government of Kabul, what are the implementation mechanisms that are going to be enforced? And let's also not overlook the raising of private militia in Afghanistan at this moment in time. So there, under Abdullah Saleh, he is actually in the process of raising a militia. Why is he raising a militia now that the peace talks have begun? And there is a prospect of peace, in the near future, to midterm, to distant future, whenever. But the fact that the peace talks have commenced, I don't think there should be a need to raise private militias there. So I have also written about the prospect of revival of what is referred to as the Northern Alliance, the former Northern Alliance. So this kind of this militia could be indicative of some people thinking along those lines, that they don't agree with the peace process, they do not want to give that kind of space to the Taliban. My other contention has always been that the Taliban will continue to gain outside of government or inside of government. If there is a peace deal and there's an interim government or even a government elected after elections, Taliban will continue to gain because they are a battle-hardened group, which unfortunately the Taliban army is not. Although they have been fighting, but not to the extent, they have been fighting for the last 19 years. So they have all the ingredients to continue gaining in Afghanistan. So the raising of the militia on the one hand and the Taliban offensive on the other hand, basically these are factors that one will have to live with. I think ultimately Taliban may become an asset for the Americans. I don't rule that out, because such unthinkable things have actually happened, in the domain of politics. So, this is how I look at Afghanistan, in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
And even
them working together for the respective causes, as well as for the look. And one other important point, maybe Amna would also like to comment on this. This is the economic survival of Afghanistan. How is the government of Kabul going to survive without American assistance and assistance of other countries in the world?
And even when they were talking about TAPI, Taliban actually endorsed the idea of TAPI, and back
CPEC too.
a few years
CPEC.
back, and they said that we would rather support it, and they can get their money.
For the economic survival, they may still want, and they have been very open about it. Stan Exai's statement is not the only one. There are other people who have also said, that they would like America to come back to the area as friends of the area, as friends of the country, rather than as an enemy and sort of fighting it. So this is very interesting. Barring the violence, Afghanistan presents a very interesting kaleidoscope of moves and counter moves and counter moves. So anything can happen. Anything can happen.
Raising militias, even Amna, is probably logical in Afghanistan, and that's probably nothing new, because chiefdoms and warlordism is actually what has been happening in Afghanistan,
But you wouldn't expect it from the government.
From the government, and by the way, because government probably would be thinking about it, because they think that from probably the American side, the message is you're on your own. So if they're on their own, they have to probably raise militias and all that. How do you see that?
Look, I just think that, this is now an opportune time for, Dr. Abdullah, as well as President Ghani and the Taliban, to actually, rewrite the history of Afghanistan, or it could be the beginning. And I think President Ghani, instead of behaving in such an immature manner, look, he's been there, he's held power, and I think, he could make a name for himself by not doing these highly immature, tactics that he's been, employing. And it's been primarily done through Amrullah Saleh. And look, Amrullah Saleh has never ever been open to negotiating with the Taliban. He's been very open in his opposition towards Pakistan, and time and again. And it's interesting because he is a part of the government where, at the end of the day, President Ghani does talk about peace, and he's the one that very recently also said that that the Taliban should enter into a long-term ceasefire. And at the same time, you've got his vice president who's behaving in such a way, and now he's going to be heading such a militia. It just does not make sense. And therefore, I think at the end of the day, I know it's easier said than done, but at the end of the day, if peace is meant to be achieved, it can only be achieved if the Afghans want it. And the Afghans will have to sort out their differences. Right. Look, external actors can only do so much. And the Americans can put pressure on all sides, but at the end of the day, the Afghans will have to want it for themselves. And yes, this is an interesting point that Rauf Saab made, that the Taliban could maybe become an asset for the Americans. Time and again, Secretary Pompeo as well, when the Ghani Abdullah feud was taking place, you had statements coming out from Pompeo saying that if anyone has honored the agreement, it's been the Taliban, and that they've been the more mature stakeholder and more responsible. So, it's interesting that 19 years later, the Americans who invaded Afghanistan for this particular reason of course, it was Al-Qaeda, but it was the Taliban too, are now praising the Taliban. So it just shows how narratives change, within a matter of minutes for interests. It's just interesting.
Well, interesting, and we continue our discussion on Afghanistan, the political situation over there, and the security situation as well. While the fighting between the Taliban and the government forces continue in Afghanistan, Pakistan is also concerned about the resurgence of TTP, Jamaat-ul-Ahrar and Hezbollah, three terrorist organizations who have been focusing on Afghanistan, carrying out attacks inside Pakistan. This is a concern for Pakistan. And there's also a recent wave of terrorism in North Waziristan and South, and in Ormara for that matter. We saw an attack on the security personnel. We'll discuss about that and the regional security dynamics. After this break, stay with us. Welcome back. We are discussing Afghanistan, the security situation over there, and the political dynamics in Afghanistan. Amna, ethnicity plays a vital role in Afghan politics, and it's not just about the Pashtuns and non-Pashtuns, Uzbeks and other people. There are different other ethnicities. What are their stakes now in this situation and their representation? They're concerned about that as well, Hazaras and Tajiks and Uzbeks for that matter. How do you see this ethnic dimension of Afghan politics?
Look, the national divide in Afghanistan has always been an issue. I think this has been going on for a very long time. But it's interesting how the Taliban have somewhat changed their policy towards this, because now they have been reaching out and they do have members of other ethnicities within their group as well.
There were reports even Hazaras.
I was going to come to that, exactly. So it's interesting how the Taliban have seen what the issues have been, and they've also realized that they need to have all the different groups on board. So and at the end of the day, I think whether you're a Uzbek or a Hazara or a Tajik, they, I think, all want peace in Afghanistan. This is so important. And yes, of course, there's going to be that, all sides trying to vie for peace and, gain a position within the government. But I think this is something that will be, again, the Afghans have to sort it out for themselves. I think the fact that the Taliban have realized that they cannot continue this Pashtun card and then they have to reach out to other ethnicities is very important. And I think the government has also realized that. Look at President Ghani, he's got Amrullah Saleh on his side, So, and then he had last time Dostum on his side. So I think this will continue. But again, my ethnicity or no ethnicity, I think the focus has to be again on trying to find some workable compromise amongst all these different ethnic groups to sit down and find some compromise where everyone gets a piece of the pie. At the end of the day, it's always about power, and this is the problem. There are many people within Kabul who do not want to recognize the Taliban, let alone share power with them. That's the major issue why there has been no developments and no progress on this front.
We are going to discuss about the political setup, future political setup. But before that, even President Ghani has been rather playing the ethnic card, the Pashtun card probably. And while having Saleh with him and Uzbeks for that matter, Dostum and these people, how do you see that? A lot of people inside Afghanistan think that probably Ghani administration has been focusing and preferring the Pashtuns more, and other ethnicities less. Is that also a concern for the people in Afghanistan?
I personally feel, I don't know through my little interactions or rather, but I feel that now, I think it's the other ethnicities that are more pro-peace process than the Pashtuns. And I think this is one maybe issue that, again, having to divide the power. And yes, President Ghani has time and again used this, but how can he deny the fact that the Taliban are a major, group that represents the Pashtuns? So this is interesting, and we'll have to see how this develops in the future. But I think, again, focus should be on a compromise. Yeah.
And Mr. Hassan, future political setup, how do you see that? Talks are going on in Doha. Do you think that there would be some interim setup in the future, and prospects for Ghani and Abdullah, are they bright? How do you see that?
Well, according to the initial plan, as it was envisaged, before the signing of these agreements, there was this thing about the interim government and all that. You see, there's one thing that I would like to sort of stress on. The ethnic divide in Afghanistan is a fundamental reality, and it has been so ever since we have known of the state of Afghanistan. It has aggravated under President Ghani's rule because he's abrasive, and he has not really been able to carry these nationalities or these ethnic groups with them. So today, the Taliban have issues with President Ghani, but even his own partners have issues with President Ghani. So the prime responsibility of carrying these stakeholders rests with President Ghani as president of Afghanistan, not with Taliban. Taliban, of course, are reaching out to them. It is in their interest to know, because if they reach out to them and they are able to win support or even cooperation from some of them, it is going to further strengthen the position in Afghanistan. They will do it definitely, and I think it's a very, very, very smart political move for them. But it is President Ghani, unfortunately, who has stepped down. And so far as President Ghani and Abdullah are concerned, basically there's no love lost between the two of them. And it is it is Abdullah who's leading the charge for peace. And it is President Ghani who's still dragging it backwards, who doesn't let it sort of flow on, as they say, He's the one who's creating impediments. He's the one who's creating hurdles in the path of peace. Like I said, 7 months, he took 7 months to release the prisoners, and even today he does not quite agree with the mechanics of this deals that America signed with both the government of Kabul and Taliban. I don't see that attitude going to change, and I think the raising of the militia is reflective of resorting to options, away from the table of peace talks.
And there would be
This
reaction.
is possibly what may happen.
And there would be reaction from the Taliban.
there will
side,
definitely be a
and
reaction,
things
and
can wriggle out of control very quickly in
In a
Afghanistan.
situation, if a situation of that kind arises, Taliban would emerge even stronger because of the resentment that some stakeholders have with President Ghani with regard to his style of governance and his personal sort of abrasiveness and all that. There is a distinct possibility that they may just walk over to the other side, and President Ghani, would be left looking for them. And in that event, the consensus candidate who can emerge to lead this interim government, if he agrees to, because he may be looking at becoming the Afghan president, through an election.
Right.
But if he agrees to, I think it possibly would be Dr. Abdullah Abdullah. He, stands a good chance of leading the interim government to a final agreement and final ceasefire and all.
Right.
So, but this is, but it keeps getting more and more interesting, as time passes, But let me just lay some stress on this militia thing. It's very dangerous. It's a very dangerous move.
So 2 points, Amna. Militia and then this future setup, political setup. These two gentlemen, President Ghani and Abdullah, they took two separate oath-taking ceremonies in the past, two presidential oath-taking ceremonies.
That's right.
They agreed, probably because of the American diplomacy over there. Zalmay Khalilzad visiting Kabul very often, Pompeo for that matter. But what would be the future, let's say, of these two gentlemen and the interim setup, if there is any in the future?
I think that's a very difficult question for anybody to answer. But I'll say this much on this front, that, any talks of a future political setup, again, should have been discussed between the Americans and the Taliban before the agreement was signed. However, an indication of the compromises that both sides, and I'm talking about mostly Abdullah or the other different factions, I believe might be willing to make, is what again was discussed in the Moscow talks when the different political factions took part. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Hamid Karzai was heading that. But they did, hint towards what they said that they would be open to an interim and what was it? I think a collective interim setup, or which was represented by different political factions. And the Taliban, in fact, said that they would be open to such an idea.
And that was the first time that when the women were involved in, in the talks.
And interestingly, then you had statements on that day coming out from Kabul, Ghani's, government, and Ghani categorically saying that
they weren't there.
They would never entertain such an idea. So, and then you did have people from even Abdullah's side who again were open to this. So I think, at the end of the day, this is something that the that the Afghans will have to do for themselves. But I think an interim setup would work, again, where you give every side a piece of the pie. But again, who is going to be the guarantor of that? And who's going to make sure that that government or that interim setup does not collapse? These are important questions. And again, I will go back to what I said in the beginning. The onus has to be on the Americans, because the Americans at the end of the day did sign an agreement with the Taliban.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We are moving to our next topic. Briefly, we're going to discuss about Kashmir. And the situation in Kashmir, as we all know, is precarious. And the Indian atrocities continue in Indian-occupied Kashmir. Kashmiris have been fighting for their right to self-determination for the last 73 years. And still there is lockdown in many parts of Kashmir. An Indian government now wants to change the dynamics, demographics for that matter, in Indian-occupied Kashmir. And by that, they want to keep a control on the occupied land. We are joined by Mr. Owais Anwar, a renowned lawyer on international law. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam. Thank you,
Mr. Owais, thank you for joining us. Talking about Kashmir and the dynamics over there, we see that human rights situation in Kashmir is very grim. And India has been using all tactics to put a control on the population in Indian-occupied Kashmir. How do you see that? And from the international law perspective, what are the dynamics over there?
Thank you very much, Taimur. Firstly, I just wanted to clarify a few things. What we call human rights violations, that is simply one term that can be used. And when we look at it from an international criminal law perspective, these are actually international crimes that are taking place. These are actually violations of the law of armed conflict, the law of war, as well as the laws that deal with crimes against humanity. So these are not simply human rights violations.
Right.
Why do I call this war crimes? Because in essence, when Pakistan says that India is occupying Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, that isn't simply a political or diplomatic statement. That is a legal statement that is being made. An occupation essentially is territory that is not a state's, has been occupied by a hostile army, which the Indian army has 700,000 troops there, and the Indians are in effective control of this territory. Once these three elements are established, clearly it becomes an occupation under international law, and the Fourth Geneva Convention applies. Now, when we start applying the Geneva Conventions, any serious violation of the laws of war or the Geneva Conventions is considered a war crime. Now, one example, a very small example of this, is the fact that the domicile law that has recently been passed and applies in India, where non-Kashmiris are being transferred in large droves into Kashmir and becoming, the citizens of Kashmir, if you will, or subjects or domicilees of Kashmir. Now, this is specifically prohibited by the Fourth Geneva Convention and amounts to a war crime. You cannot take out or put in populations like that. Similarly, the torture that is taking place, the extrajudicial murders that are taking place, that the Indian Army itself has admitted now, these are all violations of the law of war. At the same time, crimes against humanity can be attributed to the Indian Armed Forces. Now, when we talk about a crime against humanity, you don't have to establish that a war or an armed conflict is taking place. Right now, this can be established without any, legal discussion on whether, an occupation exists or not, and whatever controversy or, dispute may arise over there. So, under international law, it's not merely human rights violations that are taking place.
Right.
It is actually, I think, the correct term to apply here is that crimes against humanity and war crimes are taking place.
Right, and we see, Awais, in India, there's this brazen, I would say, disregard for the human rights. Even Amnesty International was not allowed to operate in India. We also remember when President Trump was visiting India, there was pogrom going on in New Delhi, and things are going on like that in India. What are the options for the international community, for the human rights organizations, and for Pakistan to talk about peace over there and to talk about these atrocities in Indian-occupied Kashmir? What are the options?
Thank you. I think you've hit upon a very important point, and that is that what we're seeing in India is not just something that is specific to Jammu and Kashmir, though perhaps the most flagrant violations of international law are taking place in Kashmir. But all throughout India, we see this autocratic, this classic, typical, shift towards an autocratic, hyper-nationalist, fascist regime that is taking place. And this has been done by the RSS-backed BJP government, by Modi. And it's something that is deeply concerning for the region. The reason being is that it's not simply a political party that has come in place. Now, all societies, all communities have these tendencies to go towards bigotry or violence or religious hatred. And it is the job of the state to control those. Now, when the state itself becomes the entity that is promoting this, whether it is vigilantism, attacking Dalits, Muslims, other minorities, Christians, Sikh, etc., and the state really doesn't do anything or actually actively goes and promotes this, like we see, Babri Masjid was just the initial step here, and now we see this full-blown happening all across India. That is really where the concern lies, and that is what the international community then has to address. Now, another issue is, sorry, if I could just finish this point, is that what we see is entities within the state, such as the Supreme Court or the judiciary, has now become a party to the actions that the BJP government is promoting. Because whether it's the Babri Masjid decision or the recent CBI decision on the Ayodhya, destruction of the Babri Masjid, and previous the Supreme Court judgment, which allowed a temple to be built on the site of the Babri Masjid, as well as other decisions like the Samjhota Express decision, we see the prosecution department as well as the judiciary towing the line of the government, and that becomes something very dangerous.
Right. Awais, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. Mr. Hassan and Amna, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. Wonderful discussion on Afghanistan. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. That's all from today's dialogue. See you next time. Khuda Hafiz.